Hello and welcome to Business Reporter's The Future of the Supply Chain campaign. In the past decade, the world economy has experienced many shifts, but none so pervasive as the rise of e-commerce. Growing upwards of 22% worldwide in 2020 alone, this expanding trend is changing the way supply chains need to run to stay competitive. Retail warehouses, distributors, and third-party logistics operators alike are being tasked with fulfilling more orders in less time, and this is proving to be a massive challenge for organizations running legacy systems. What can you do to tackle that challenge and make your supply chain a source of competitive advantage? That's what we're going to discuss today with Peter Brereton, President and CEO of Tecsys. Good morning, Peter.
Good morning.
I'd like to start by asking what the main challenges are that are facing global supply chains over the last decade. What's the state of play today?
Well, global supply chains are being impacted right now on all sides. If you look at the buy side, we've got geopolitical changes that are happening, supply chains that need to retreat back into their own countries and find local sources of supply. On the sell side, as you've alluded to, e-commerce is changing everything. What used to be shipments of a few hundred large orders in a month for many organizations have now become many thousands and thousands of very small shipments as we go direct to consumer. And in between the buy side and the sell side, supply chains are being impacted by regulatory compliance issues. The need to track and trace everything, prevent counterfeit goods from getting into the supply chain, comply with, if it's drug, the Drug Supply Chain Security Act, and so on. So regulatory compliance, throughout, and meanwhile, both the buy side and the sell side of the supply chains are being substantially re-engineered.
Given that, where does that leave the supply chain of an average Fortune 500 company?
Well, the average Fortune 500 company has put in supply chain solutions very often in the 90s. Typically, they implemented these large sort of monolithic platforms that were designed around long-term plans, steady supply chains. You set up a supply chain once and you operate it for years. So to some extent, it's left them unequipped to deal with today's rapidly evolving supply chain. In today's supply chain, what you did 2 years ago may well be irrelevant to what's happening today. So many of these organizations are left with sort of their feet mired in cement when it's the people wearing sneakers that can respond quickly enough to the changing demands of the world we're in.
What's the potential cost of having an inadequate supply chain management platform in the present environment?
Well, in many cases, it's a case of survival. Are you going to be around to continue to play the game? The most recent example, I guess it's not that recent now, a couple of years ago, Target trying to break into the Canadian market. They set up quite a number of beautiful stores across the country. Unfortunately, a huge percentage of the shelves were empty. It was a catastrophic failure of using a large, complex, but monolithic style old supply chain to manage in today's world. It's a critical business decision, and it's a decision that needs to be made to get off these old platforms and onto the right agile platforms in order to support all of the other important business decisions that need to be made to remain competitive.
What kind of supply chain management system does a company need to remain resilient and profitable?
Nimble in every way. You have to be able to introduce new suppliers to that platform very readily, connect to them in a digital and modern fashion, onboard new customers, onboard new employees, hire young people straight out of school and have them arrive and find themselves in a platform and in a software environment that they feel comfortable with and that they feel is sort of modern and fits the world they're used to. We've just come through a pandemic, or we're in the middle of a pandemic right now. And that has changed thousands of supply chains in terms of the ability to source product, the ability to move them rapidly through the supply chain, deal with changing demands, deal with emergency supplies that they didn't anticipate they would even need. So it's it's critical to have a platform that supports the kind of I keep using that word nimble, but that's what's needed. It's an agile world.
Tell us a little bit more about Tecsys. Where do you fit into the equation?
At a high level, we're a supply chain focused ERP. So we do order to cash and purchase to pay and credit and pricing and, inventory management, forecasting, demand planning, warehouse management, transportation management, budgeting, all of the things that you would expect in a supply chain focused ERP. But we only do supply chain.
Can you give us a few examples of how your platform has empowered organizations in the midst of this rapid change?
Well, if I take a few examples, we have one client, a US-based client. They're, part of the Fortune 100 in the US, large distributor of pharmaceuticals and medical and surgical supplies and implants and that kind of thing. In their case, they are running one of the sort of larger legacy platforms for a good part of their business, but their most rapidly growing and evolving portions of their business, life sciences, biosciences, and third-party logistics, they put on our platform. It's an area of their business that are undergoing such constant change that they felt they needed a much more agile platform. A few months ago, we had a major U.S. city that was running into COVID crisis. Hospitals overflowing, major panic in the population. They needed to rapidly ramp up a PPE and emergency supplies distribution center, including ventilators and protective equipment and so on. And again, we worked with them, and in a matter of a few weeks, ramped up a rapid response distribution center for them. The common theme here you can see is organizations experiencing a rapidly evolving supply chain. We end up being, in most cases, the winning platform for them.
Okay, let's say I'm a CEO and I want to work with you. Give me an idea of how we get started.
Well, typically the conversation begins with sort of what are your points of pain. We've been in supply chain at this point for 30 years, literally since before supply chain was called supply chain. And our sales organization includes solutions engineers that understand how to sort of diagnose supply chain problems and figure out how to tackle those issues. So it begins with a conversation about what are your issues, what are the challenges your organization is facing, and then we work with your team to craft the right solution, combination of software and in some cases consulting expertise to help you achieve what you need to achieve and be equipped to deal with the future.
Now, any major company will have substantial legacy tech in place, and a project like this seems to be quite a disruptive process. So how do you implement the system without disturbing your customers' experience?
That is always a challenge. You are, to some extent, you're doing open heart surgery on a live patient. It's almost a nervous system transplant, in fact, as you change how you're dealing with customers, how you're dealing with suppliers, how you're managing the supply chain internally. There are very few jobs in the organization that are not impacted by this kind of a change, but that's assumed in terms of how we manage the project. We've done this many, many times, and it involves, data cleansing, dry runs, testing of process and retesting of process to make sure that everything will run smoothly. And then we accompany you as you make the transition over to the new platform.
So for any decision makers watching this video, what key takeaways would you like them to remember?
We are in a world of very rapid change. If you do not have a supply chain platform that is designed for and simply assumes change in every part of the supply chain and has the ability to handle it with nimbleness and agility and accuracy and efficiency, then you're out of the game. So it's all about change, and it's all about equipping your organization to deal with relentless change.
Well, you've certainly given us a lot to think about. So Peter Brereton from Tecsys, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.